Open the city sample file to learn about fog, smog, and haze. Do a test render by clicking the teapot or by pressing Shift-Q as a shortcut. Observe that this rendering already has an environment background. Press 8 to open the Environment and Effects dialog, and notice that we're using a gradient map in the Environment Map slot. Press M to open the Material Editor, and you can see that the sky map is right here, and it is simply blending between these three colors. Lower down in the Environment and Effects dialog box, there's an atmosphere rollout. Add a fog atmospheric effect, and its rollout will appear at the bottom of the dialog. Scroll this up so you can edit the parameters. There are two types of fog, standard and layered. Let's start with standard. I'm going to go into the top viewport by pressing T and select the camera. You can control where the fog appears based upon the environment ranges that are set up in the camera. I'll say Show, and then I'll set the far range at something like 500 feet. And now we can see the far range plane right here. I'll move that back by increasing the range about here. That ends up being about 1,550 feet. I'll set the near range at 300 feet, and we can see it right here. I'll move that up maybe a little bit more, right about, say, there. Now this will allow us to control the fog as a function of distance away from the camera. There won't be any fog before the near range, and then the fog will start to exist, and it will reach its maximum value at the far range. I'll look through the camera again by pressing C, and then I'll do another test render. I'd actually like to compare it to the rendering I made before, so I'd like to open up the rendered frame window by choosing Rendering, Show Last Rendering, and I'll clone this, and we'll make a comparison. So there's the fog. It's obviously too dramatic, and we need to adjust some of the parameters. Press 8 to open the Environment and Effects dialog up again, and go down here. Notice that there is no fog rollout at the bottom. You need to select the effect, and then you'll be able to scroll down further. So right here we can set how much fog we want at the near range. I'll set that at 25%, and I'll set 75% at the far range. Because we had this set at 100% previously, it completely obscured the environment background. By setting this at a value of 75%, we should be able to see some of the sky colors coming through. I'll do another rendering, and there you have it. So this type of fog fades with distance away from the camera. Layered fog works differently. When I choose this radio button, it grays out the standard controls. Those are turned off. And now I have to work with the layered controls. And they work from top to bottom. So I'd like to say that the top is maybe 150 feet high, and the bottom of the fog is maybe 100 feet off the ground. And I'd like the fall off to be on the bottom. That means that the fog will fade out on the bottom of this layered range. I'll clone this window so that we can make a comparison and do another test render. So layered fog doesn't work with distance away from the camera. Instead, it's working with the screen, and it is putting in some fog here at some distance above the ground plane. Layered fog is good for simulating haze. I'll change the fog color to a very light yellow hue to simulate some of the haze that we might see in the city. I'll also turn the density down to 15% to really tone down this effect. I'll make another test render. And so that's looking a bit more like haze. You can add multiple fog effects to create a layered fog. I'll add another fog, and this time it is selected down here at the bottom of the effects stack. I'll set the layered radio button, and I'll set the top of this fog at maybe 300 feet, and the bottom will be where the previous fog left off, which was at 150 feet. And I'll go ahead and make that fall off on the top. And then I'll change the color to be maybe just a little bit of a hint of yellow, very subtle. And then I'll go ahead and do another rendering, and we have a combination of the two fogs. Now that's too much, I'd have to say, so I'm going to turn the density down to 15% and render again. Now that's all well and good, but I don't like the way that the fog is covering up some of the buildings here in the downtown core. I'd like that fog to be behind the buildings. But there's actually no way to do that here with this combination of fogs that we've set up. Fortunately, there's another way to simulate fog, and it works within a volume. I'd like to inactivate these fog effects that I've set up, and then I will go ahead and close the dialog, and I'll leave this one open, and I'll go ahead and close this window for now. I'd like to keep this one open for a comparison from our original state. Then I'll go into the top viewport by pressing T, go to the Create panel under Helpers, and choose Atmospheric Apparatus here from this drop-down. And you have 3 different volumes that you can create. I'll make a box gizmo, which is really just a box volume that represents where that fog will exist. I'll rotate this gizmo so that it lines up with the camera direction, more or less. And I'll position it somewhere in space so that it represents the fog that I'd like to create. I'll look at it in perspective, and I'll move it up maybe to 100 feet in Z so that there's no fog below that threshold. And then I'll go to the Modify panel and change the height of this gizmo to 200 feet. And then I'll click on Add down here in this Atmospheres and Effects rollout, and I have a choice of Volume Fog or the Fire effect. I want the Volume Fog. Then I'll select that and click Setup, and that brings us back to the Environment and Effects dialog. I can scroll down, and I have the parameters for the Volume Fog. I'll try Fractal Noise, and let's just do a rendering and see what we get. I'm in the wrong viewport. I need to go back into the camera and do another test render. And it's obviously too dense. I'm going to take this down quite a bit by setting the density from 20 down to 1, and I'll render that again. So the nice thing about this is that you can control where that fog is going to exist by carefully positioning the box gizmo in space. I'd like to tone this down, and one way to do that is by making it exponential. This will decrease the amount of fog that you have. And you can use this in conjunction with some of the other effects that you've already set up. I'll select this one and make it active, and we'll do another test render. So the method here is really trial and error. You can create these effects and tweak them, and you're just going to have to do multiple test renders in order to create an atmosphere that looks convincing.